our point of view, the destruction of the United States Army, because that's precisely what has happened over the last 6 years. The Army is decimated, it's not able to function correctly, and God forbid, whether a threat in Korea or in the Taiwan Straits, except for the Navy and the Air Force, we would have very, very little capability to respond in a measured way.
Mr. McGovern, on 9/11, we saw 2 planes collapse 3 buildings at the rate of free fall. Do you think the United States government was indirectly or directly involved in the events of 9/11?
Well, people ask me this a lot, and people say, well, don't you believe that Dick Cheney, for example, the author of torture and kidnapping and illegal eavesdropping, all those things, don't you think he's capable of playing that kind of role? And I always respond this way. I said, well, you're asking me what I believe, right? And they said, yeah. Well, I said, yeah, I can believe that Cheney's capable of that, but I don't do faith-based intelligence. And I don't go on the basis of beliefs. I go on the basis of evidence. That is the old tradition, the ethos under which we operated, speaking truth to power and speaking without favor. Now, what does the evidence suggest? The evidence suggests to me simply that there are a whole host of very, very important unanswered questions. Why are they unanswered? Because this administration will not answer the questions. It's that simple. And so it gives me a lot of heat under my Irish skull here to hear people who are trying to find the answers to these questions called conspiracy theorists and all kinds of other things to dismiss them. I don't want people who are trying to find the answers. And all I can say is that, to the degree I can support them, to the degree I can point out the incredible inconsistencies in the government's own official version. Most recently, I could give you 2 or 3 examples, but most recently, the BBC anchor in Washington was asked, how could it be that your reporter sitting there in New York with her back to the Building 7, how could it be that she reported, and ladies and gentlemen, we just have word that Building 7 has also collapsed. Now, big problem there. Over her left shoulder is Building 7. Building collapsed. Standing straight. Building 7 did not collapse until 26 minutes later. Now, the BBC anchor was asked about this, and whether he really didn't know about it or was feigning ignorance, he said, well, is that true? I said, yeah, it's true. Is it on tape? Yeah, it's on tape. We have it on tape. You BBC folks claim that the tape has been destroyed, but we've got it, okay? And he said, well, are you looking at a conspiracy here? And he said, interlocutor says, well, we're just trying to figure out how somebody can say that Building 7 has just fallen when you can see right over her shoulder that it's standing up tall and that it didn't fall until 26 minutes later. Building 7 was not hit by an airplane. And what does the 9/11 Commission report say about Building 7? 0. So, bottom line, the 9/11 Commission report is a cover-up. Okay, pure and simple. The question is what it's covering up, and whether it's just simply gross malfeasance or misfeasance or a total ineptitude on the part of our government, or whether it's something more sinister. The jury is out, and what we need is an independent commission, not led by somebody who's checking every week with a call roll, which we know that Philip Tellico, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, was indeed doing, okay? Not somebody like that, but somebody with the technical credentials who can look at this thing and get to the bottom of it, because as we know, 9/11 was seized upon in I'm a New Yorker originally. I felt that trauma. One of my cousins was killed. And what was happening here was the administration was seizing upon the very real trauma that all of us felt about 9/11 to justify attacking a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And, I've seen a lot of cynical stuff in my 45 years in Washington, but nothing beats that.
Well, Since 9/11, we've watched our government pass laws greatly reducing our civil liberties, such as the Patriot Act and the Military Commission Act. What is your opinion on the government's broad endeavors into warrantless wiretapping and eavesdropping on Americans? Do you feel we are slowly moving toward a police state?
Well, I do this in a sort of comparative way. I was born 1 week before the Germans sent their tanks into Poland to start World War II. I lived in Germany for 5 years plus. So I had all manner of opportunity in the 60s and 70s to ask Germans, old and young, how could it be? How could it possibly be that you people, among the most highly educated, among the most highly cultivated people in the Western world, how could you sit by idly and not find your voices as Hitler passed this and that law, the emergency laws of various kinds, very similar to the Patriot Act, and not find your voice? How could it be that your churches, your Catholic Church, your Evangelical Lutheran Church, how could it be that they could not find their voice and speak out against this suppression of civil liberties? And I never got a straight answer. What we have now is, in this country, is a very similar situation. We have claims of fear. We have people who, you ask your neighbor, just ask your neighbor, say, well now, don't you mind that your telephone calls can be monitored quite legally under various new acts? And most of them will say, I don't mind, I'm not talking to someone at the bottom. Well, that's precisely the worst way to look at it, because this is an infringement on civil liberties that was prohibited by law after J. Edgar Hoover used to do this all the time, not only in you and me, but on congressmen, senators, on presidents themselves. And that's why they put the law in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978. So that would be prohibited. Now what happened was, the president thought, well, under the trauma of 9/11, I can get anything passed, and when I don't get passed, I'll just skirt around anyway. And so he found a willing accomplice on the part of a highly decorated Air Force general named Michael Hayden. He was head of the National Security Agency, and it used to be that the first commandment of the National Security Agency, this is the one that intercepts telephone calls and emails and all kinds of communications. It was the first commandment there, thou shalt not eavesdrop on Americans, period, end quote. Okay, that was the ethos, that was the strong rule. Now, when President Bush, Vice President Cheney called Michael Hayden in around 9/11 and said, well, we're going to just kind of forget about that law. We want you to set up a system where you can intercept all manner of emails and telephone conversations and whatnot of ordinary Americans. And we're not going to tell Congress about it. We're just going to do it now. Are you game? Now, Michael Hayden, with 4 stars on his shoulder, swore the same oath that I did when I was a second lieutenant, and that is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. His duty was to say, Mr. President, I know better than anyone else in this country that that's